I found it on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that didn't feel different until it did. Lena's car was in the driveway because she'd asked me to swap the wiper blades. Clearwater rain had been coming down in thick sheets all week, and she'd been complaining that the windshield smeared more than it cleared. I had my tool bag open on the driveway, the smell of wet asphalt and fresh rubber in the air, and I popped the glove compartment to check the cabin filter while I was in there. A napkin, one of those cheap fast food ones, was stuffed in the corner like trash that missed the bin. Under it sat a phone. Not deeply hidden, not taped under anything, just wrapped like someone meant to tuck it away and forgot the final step. It was warm, like it had been on recently. When I hit the side button, the screen lit immediately. No passcode, no photo of us on the lock screen, no notifications from work, nothing that looked like a normal life. I opened the contacts list. It was almost empty, no family, no coworkers, no saved numbers that made sense. Just one name, Jay. My thumb hovered there for a second, and I remember noticing how steady my hand was. That surprised me. I expected adrenaline, anger, something dramatic. Instead, it felt like a beam giving way inside a wall, quiet at first, then final once you hear it. In that moment, I didn't know who he was. But I knew one thing for sure. The life I thought I had was already over. If this looks clean on the surface, it's only because the collapse hadn't made noise yet. We lived in Clearwater, Florida, in a quiet development where the houses all looked different until you spent enough time there to realize they were built from the same plans. Same setbacks, same driveways, same palm trees planted at identical angles by crews that moved fast and never came back. It was the kind of place you chose because nothing surprising was supposed to happen. I'm Ethan Moore. I've been a construction contractor most of my adult life. Residential remodels, small commercial jobs, hurricane repairs when the season demanded it. Long days that started before the heat set in, steady income that showed up because I showed up. I knew where my money came from and where it went. I liked it that way. Lena worked in an office downtown. Administrative work, project coordination. She explained it once, and I didn't ask many follow-up questions. Her days were climate-controlled, structured, full of meetings and emails. After work she went to yoga. On weekends, she attended what she called personal development seminars. Breathwork, mindfulness, alignment, words that sounded harmless when spoken calmly. We didn't fight much. That's what I told people later, and it was true in the narrow sense. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors, no nights spent on opposite sides of the house. Our disagreements were soft, trimmed down before they could turn into anything memorable. We were good at staying reasonable. What we did have were small changes that didn't ask permission to exist. Late nights that came with vague explanations. New routines that didn't include me. A phone that was always placed face down on the counter, like gravity itself couldn't be trusted. She laughed more at things that weren't happening in the room. I noticed. Of course I did. But noticing and acknowledging are different skills. I called it stress. Work stress. Growth stress. The kind of stress that shows up when people are evolving. It was a convenient word. A flexible one. It let me keep my schedule, my habits, my assumptions intact. As long as I used it, nothing else had to change. And for a while, that felt like stability. After I found the second phone, something in me shifted into a quieter gear. Not anger. Not panic. Just a kind of internal stillness, like a machine idling after being switched out of production mode. I stopped explaining things away because explanations require effort, and effort implies hope. I didn't have that anymore. I started watching, not in a dramatic way. I didn't check her phone when she showered or follow her in my truck like a bad movie cliché. I stayed where I was and let repetition do the work for me. Patterns don't hide well when you stop interrupting them with excuses. The same days of the week she stayed late. Tuesdays and Thursdays, almost like appointments she didn't need to remember. The same phrasing when she talked about work, meetings that ran long, projects that needed alignment. The same half smile when she said it, like she was repeating a line she'd practiced just enough times to believe. Messages appeared on her main phone while we were sitting together, then disappeared before I could read more than a word or two. She never looked at me when it happened. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, thumb moving fast, precise. Efficient. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask who she was texting. Questions would have changed the behavior, and I didn't want that. I wanted to see it as it was, uninterrupted. The name, Jay, stopped feeling random. It started showing up in my head when I looked at the clock. When she grabbed her keys with a sudden sense of purpose. When she took calls in the garage with the door half closed, voice lowered, posture angled away from the house. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a shape forming on its own, piece by piece, without my involvement. That mattered to me. I needed to know that whatever this was, it wasn't something I created by imagining it. I didn't feel jealous. That surprised me too. What I felt was distance, clean, measurable distance. Like I was already standing outside something that used to belong to me, watching it continue without asking where I'd gone. I didn't ask questions. Not because I was afraid of the answers, but because questions would have implied that I still believed there was something to discuss. I didn't test her reactions or leave bait on the table to see how she'd respond. I didn't look for excuses that could make this smaller or easier to carry. I let the silence do its job. What broke wasn't my trust. That had already thinned out over time, stretched by small inconsistencies I'd chosen to ignore. What broke was my role. I realized I wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. The urge to repair, to negotiate, to restore balance had simply shut off. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. I understood then that I was stepping out of a game I never agreed to play. One with rules that kept changing, where honesty was optional and accountability was flexible. I hadn't signed up for secrecy, for parallel lives, for explanations that only worked if you didn't look at them too closely. On the outside, nothing changed. I still woke up early. I still made coffee the same way. I still asked how her day went and listened without interrupting. We ate dinner at the table, talked about schedules, weather, errands that needed to be handled. From a distance, we probably looked solid. Stable. Married in the way people like to point to. Inside, the decision was already made. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was resolution, quiet and unmovable. Like setting a level on a foundation and seeing the bubble settle dead center. Once it does, there's nothing left to debate. I stopped imagining futures that required her participation. I stopped factoring her into long-term plans. I didn't announce any of this, not even to myself in words. It existed as a shift in weight, a redistribution of attention. I was no longer waiting for clarity. I already had it. Once the decision settled, my attention shifted outward. Not emotionally, mechanically. I started noticing patterns the way I do on job sites, where mistakes don't announce themselves but repeat until someone bothers to measure them. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was documenting reality. Routes were the first thing. The path she took to work changed on the same days every week. She said traffic was better that way. It wasn't. I drove those roads for years. I knew where the backups formed and when. Her detours added time, not efficiency. Spending came next. Small charges that didn't match the schedule she described. Coffee shops nowhere near her office. Parking fees on days she claimed to work late but stayed in. Nothing outrageous. Just consistent. Consistency is louder than excess. Phone calls happened in the car now. Engine off. Windows up. Voice lowered into something careful and contained. When I walked outside unexpectedly, the calls ended fast, like someone hitting a kill switch. She'd smile, ask if I needed anything, as if nothing had been interrupted. The second phone stayed in the glove compartment most of the time. I didn't touch it again. I didn't need to. I learned its rhythm without opening it. It came alive at specific hours, early afternoons, then again in the evening before she came home. Always the same windows. Always short bursts of activity. And always the same name. Facts piled up slowly, then all at once. Dates aligned. Stories overlapped where they shouldn't. Details blurred when she tried to recall them, then sharpened when they served her point. I wrote nothing down. I didn't need notes. This wasn't a case to build. It was a structure revealing its own stress fractures. I didn't rush. Rushing would have meant urgency, and urgency would have meant I still needed something from her. I didn't. I waited for the truth to move on its own, because lies depend on cooperation to survive. I had already withdrawn mine. Jay turned out to have a name that fit easily into conversation, the kind people repeated without thinking twice. Jason Reed. I heard it first at a fundraiser I hadn't planned on attending, standing near the back with a plastic cup of warm beer, listening to introductions echo through the room. Startup mentor, community builder, married, the kind of man whose reputation arrived before he did. Once I saw his face, things aligned faster. He showed up in local articles, smiling in group photos, arm casually placed behind whoever stood closest. He spoke about growth, integrity, vision. He used the same words Lena used when she came home, energized, distracted, full of explanations that didn't require details. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. What surprised me was how little effort it took for the situation to stop belonging only to us. One quiet, anonymous gesture, no accusations, no drama, was enough to let information move where it naturally wanted to go. Work noticed first, then social circles. People who liked order and predictability began asking questions that didn't have comfortable answers. Schedules conflicted. Stories didn't line up. Appearances became strained. What had been framed as mentorship started to look like something else when viewed without trust filling in the gaps. I stayed out of it. I didn't provide commentary or context. I didn't clarify motives. I let silence carry more weight than explanation ever could. The truth didn't need my voice to function. It only needed space. What had been hidden stopped being private. Not because I exposed it, but because secrecy fails when enough people stop protecting it. I watched from a distance as conversations tightened, as doors closed gently but permanently. Consequences didn't arrive all at once. They rarely do. They arrived in stages, orderly and impersonal. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't painful either. It was simply inevitable. The conversation happened on a Sunday evening, after dinner, when the house had settled into that quiet that usually means comfort. The dishes were done. The TV was off. She sat across from me at the table, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched in minutes. I could tell she'd rehearsed. Her posture gave it away. She talked first. She always did when she needed control. She said things were being misunderstood. That lines were being crossed by other people, not her. That I didn't have the full picture. She used words like complicated and unfair, stacking them carefully, like if she placed them right they'd form something solid. I didn't interrupt. She asked me to explain what I thought was happening, to tell her what I'd heard, to clarify what I'd done. When I didn't answer, her voice tightened just enough to notice. She told me to stop whatever was in motion, to handle it quietly, privately, like adults. I stayed where I was. Silence unsettles people who rely on narrative. Without resistance, her explanations lost structure. She circled back, repeated herself, adjusted details mid-sentence. At one point she reached across the table, stopped halfway, then pulled her hand back like she'd touched something hot. She asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer that either. What I understood in that moment was simple. She wasn't talking to me to reconnect. She was talking to regain footing. To see if I was still participating in the version of us where her words determined reality. I wasn't. I listened until she ran out of momentum. Until the room held more quiet than sound. When she finally stopped, I didn't fill the space. I stood up, rinsed my mug, and set it in the rack. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I didn't negotiate. I just didn't move back into the role she needed me to play. And that told her everything she needed to know. After that night, things moved without me in a way that felt almost procedural. I didn't make calls. I didn't follow up. I didn't check for updates. I went to work, ran crews, signed off on inspections, handled delays caused by weather and materials like I always had. Life narrowed back down to what required my direct input, and everything else took care of itself. Questions started circulating anyway, not to me, around me. I heard fragments through mutual acquaintances, half-finished sentences that stopped when I walked into a room. People were careful with their words, which told me more than honesty would have. Care only shows up when there's something to protect. Investigations happened quietly, not the dramatic kind. Internal reviews, clarifications, meetings that didn't include the people being discussed. Rumors tightened into something more formal once paperwork got involved. Timelines were requested, emails reviewed, boundaries examined retroactively. I stayed out of all of it. Lena tried a few more times to pull me back in. Not directly. Indirect comments. Strategic vulnerability. Statements designed to provoke reassurance or defense. I gave neither. The absence of resistance seemed to exhaust her faster than confrontation ever could. People who had stood close to her started disappearing. Lunches stopped happening. Invitations dried up. Allies rebranded themselves as neutral observers. It wasn't cruelty. It was risk management. Everyone understands that language eventually. What struck me most was how little effort it took on my part to let everything unwind. I had always assumed that endings required force, decisions, declarations, lines drawn in the sand. But this one didn't. It required only that I stop buffering reality for someone else. I didn't push anything forward. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct assumptions or challenge narratives that weren't mine to manage. I simply didn't interfere. And without interference, the truth behaved like gravity. It settled where it belonged. When it was over, it didn't feel like an ending. There was no clear moment where everything stopped. No final argument. No dramatic exit. Just a gradual absence that became permanent once nobody tried to correct it. Lena moved out quietly. Boxes over a few afternoons. Practical things first. Clothes. Files. Items that had meaning only because they'd been used long enough to feel permanent. She didn't cry. Neither did I. We spoke about logistics the way coworkers do when a project wraps early and no one wants to admit relief. There was no sense of victory. I didn't feel smarter or stronger for having seen the truth before it announced itself. I didn't feel justified. What surprised me was how little satisfaction there was in being right. Accuracy doesn't comfort you. It just removes confusion. There was no regret either. Regret requires imagining a different version of events that could have been sustained. I couldn't see one. Once the structure failed, rebuilding on the same ground would have meant ignoring what I now knew. I wasn't capable of that anymore. Clarity was the only thing that remained. I walked away without shouting, without revenge, without explanations. I didn't issue ultimatums or demand confessions. I didn't need closure delivered in words. Closure came from alignment, my actions finally matching what I understood to be true. People asked how I was holding up. I told them I was fine. That answer wasn't brave or dismissive. It was accurate. Fine meant stable. It meant no longer negotiating with reality. It meant sleeping through the night without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I didn't look back to check if I'd been followed. I didn't wait for acknowledgement. I didn't need agreement for my decision to stand. That was enough. Sometimes leaving isn't loud. Sometimes it's just precise. And precision holds. I'm back to building houses now. Not flipping, not rushing, not cutting corners to meet someone else's timeline. Solid work. Concrete poured slow enough to settle right. Framing checked twice before it's closed in. I spend more time on foundations than I used to, because everything above them depends on what you don't see once the job is finished. Most mornings start early. Coffee on the tailgate. The sound of tools laid out with intention. There's comfort in work that responds honestly to effort. If something is off, it shows. If it's done right, it holds. No hidden compartments. No second versions. Clearwater looks the same as it always did. Same streets. Same light off the water in the evenings. The difference is internal. I don't negotiate with what's in front of me anymore. I don't fill in gaps with hope or explanations that make things easier to accept but harder to live with. I think sometimes about that name on the phone. Just a single letter. How something so small can tilt an entire structure without making a sound. By the time you notice, the shift has already happened. That's what I carry forward. Sometimes one name on a hidden phone changes everything long before the truth is spoken out loud. And sometimes the quietest moment is the one where you finally stop pretending it hasn't already changed.